All right, y'all. We spent our time in our live session this week talking about some of the big accomplishments and significant changes in the role of the government that the New Deal provided for us. So it's really important that we understand the role of the New Deal, like what the New Deal does, what it changes, what it makes possible, but also understanding the challenges, criticisms of the New Deal, as well as at the very tail end of the day, the legacies, the impact long term of the New Deal is incredibly important. As I pointed out at the end of our live session, one really important element that we still see carried through to our society today is the New Deal establishes what we call in politics a limited welfare state, right? A limited welfare state, which is this understanding of the government as a means to solve problems, as this viewing of the federal government and state governments to an extent as well, as who is responsible for uplifting people in times of crisis. Like this welfare state, the state is responsible for people's welfare. Whereas before the New Deal, we don't really see that ever, right? Even in the progressive era, it's not so much that the state is providing people's welfare, the state's regulating and working to accomplish balance. But with the New Deal, and ever since, we see the creation and then later the growth of this welfare state that we now call home today. So we'll talk today about the New Deal's challenges first and legacies afterwards. Let's talk challenges. Now, it's important to understand that there's challenges from both wings. There's liberals that say we need to do more, and there's conservatives that say we've already done too much. Right? So it's important that you're able to identify individuals and their criticisms of the New Deal from both perspectives. Now, on the hasn't done enough, hasn't gone far enough, the liberal side of things who want more to get done. A couple important names. First, Father Charles Coughlin. He's a famous Catholic radio preacher. And his criticism is that it hasn't done enough to fix the economy. He proposes using free coinage of silver for monetary reform, argues that if more money is in circulation, people can get back on their feet, which again brings back the argument of the populists back in the 1890s. But his more radical proposal is the nationalization of major industries. That's why I put it in bold and italics for you. Father Charles Coughlin argues that FDR and the national government should be nationalizing major industries, meaning the federal government takes them over and runs them so that they're run for the common good, not for profit. And the industry specifically that he wants the federal government to take over is banking. He argues that it is banking for profit, which got us into this mess in the first place with credit and with taking people's investments and investing in themselves as the banks trying to get richer and richer. And that's what got us into this mess. So we need to nationalize the banks to avoid that problem in the future. He loses a little bit of and a lot of bit of credibility by being incredibly and increasingly anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish perspectives, blaming the Jewish people for what they've done to banking. It's a common stereotype, incredibly false stereotype of Jewish people that they are corrupting of banking industries. And that ends up being kind of the loss of his credibility there. But his criticism is incredibly important and influential at the time. Next critic who says we've done enough is a doctor, Dr. Francis Townsend, who proposes an old age pension. Right? This is in the days before Social Security. So this criticism that we should pay people to be old. Right? And in a sense, the argument there is if we pay people to be old, they have money to spend and they're not working. Right? So it's a win-win. It puts money in circulation and it opens up jobs because old people can retire. His argument is that his proposal is $200 a month for everybody over the age of 60, with the caveat, with the condition that they have to spend the money that month. It doesn't carry over to the next month. It has to be spent month to month to month. So his thinking there is that it would just increase consistent money in circulation in the economy. Once Social Security is adopted, it kind of takes away this criticism, but it's important to note that it is a very clear criticism with a very specific amount of money attached to it. And the third is Huey Long, nicknamed the Kingfish from Louisiana. He's a senator. Huey Long is maybe the most radical of all three of these. He proposes a share our wealth program, which is a much more aggressive way of wealth redistribution. So poor people have much more money at the expense of rich people to try to balance society out with a very, very aggressive progressive tax code, which means the more you make, the more you pay. He proposes a 100% tax bracket on any income over $100 million, which is just an absolute ton of money. But basically, what this says is that once you make $100 million, every dollar above that gets taxed 100%. So every dollar above that gets sent right to the federal government. And his proposal created a guaranteed annual income, of $2,500 for everybody, right? Regardless of what job you have. That this idea of like a basic living wage is a proposal of Huey Long. He also proposes in his criticism free college education for all, free vocational job training for all, so like trade schools, old age pensions as well, much like Townsend did. And I lost my slide there. Hold on one second. Yeah, a month guaranteed vacation for all. That every worker in America should be guaranteed a month off every year. So Huey Long's proposals, of course, sound lovely and quite utopian based, but these proposals are his view on why the New Deal hasn't done enough to not just address people's needs short term, but reform the system to benefit all. On the other side of things, it's gone too far. The Republican Party, right? The Democrats have really embraced this idea of social welfare and using the government, right? Liberalism, using the government to address the problems of society. Republicans disagree. Which is great. The New Deal and their party platform in 1936, when they're running against FDR's reelection, the New Deal administration constantly seeks to usurp, which is a good political word, it means to take away, to usurp the rights reserved to the states and to the people. So his argument is quite clear. It's just the federal government's become too powerful. The federal government's now doing things that are rights that the people should have and the state should have to do for themselves. And their argument therefore is that it's bad for businesses. I'm going to disagree here and say that, what's bad for businesses? The Great Depression. But alas, here we'll agree to disagree. Another organization that is anti-New Deal is the American Liberty League. Notice here this idea of liberty is used as like freedom from government intervention, which the New Deal is heavy on. And these are conservative, rich, wealthy business leaders, like the owners of General Motors, who are upset that they have to pay way more in taxes to pay for these programs. These are industrialists that are opposed to what they call dictatorial policies. FDR is acting like a dictator in making us do all of these things. William Randolph Hearst, the famous newspaper owner, we often give him credit for helping start the Spanish-American War back during the imperialism discussion we had, for yellow journalism, sensationalizing the Spanish atrocities. He's really rich. He's a big a network owner. He doesn't like this because the taxes are high on him as a rich person. And the New Deal also increased inheritance taxes. So when you pass money from like a parent to a kid when you die, that's taxed much more heavily to, again, attempt to get the rich to pay a different share of the bargain. And this is an important political shift as well, as we see some Southern Democrats beginning to dislike the New Deal because, in a sense, Harry Byrd from Virginia is the best example. They're critical that the FDR with the New Deal has abandoned the conservative principles that the Democratic Party has always stood for. Now, if you think about this, they're not wrong, right? Because for the most part, the Democratic Party up to this point has been the party of states' rights, has been the party of a strict interpretation, has been the party of small federal government. I think back to Jefferson and Jackson. But we can trace a very clear line. This is why it's important to better understand our continuities and our changes over time. We can trace a very clear line to the Democratic Party back to 1896. In my belief and in my understanding, it is the adoption of the populist principles, right? When the Democrats and the populists merged in 1896, they nominate William Jennings Bryan. They adopt that like pro-regulation, pro-worker, pro-federal government intervention to curb the powers of industry back in 1896. It's that begins the Democratic Party's transition from a more conservative states' rights type of policy of the Civil War era and anti-Reconstruction and even Jackson and Jefferson to a party that embraces more federal government authority and responsibility. And then we see that again through the Wilson administration during the Progressive era, right? It's Wilson's presidency that passes, for example, the Clayton Antitrust Act, creates the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Reserve Act, to regulate banking. So we start seeing the Democrats at the end of the Gilded Age start leaving that political stalemate behind that we discussed during period 6 and embracing a much more active role. And it's the New Deal that kind of pushes them over the edge to be a much more regulatory party. And some Southern Democrats are opposed to this as an abandonment of their conservative principles. Right, as I put on the slide, recall the Democratic Party's legacy to this point. Now, one of the most important elements of the New Deal is that not many, but a couple of the really key important programs are found unconstitutional. The Supreme Court rules with both the Agriculture Adjustment Act and the National Recovery Act, two really important, pivotal New Deal programs. The Supreme Court rules that both of those are unconstitutional because the federal government is establishing, in both cases, whether it be industry or farm work, establishing what people can produce, right? Both are attempts to stop overproduction. So they put caps and limits on what people can produce with their farm work or their industrial work. And the Supreme Court case, in two cases, Schechter Poultry versus the US and US versus Butler in 35 and 36, are going to rule that both programs are actually unconstitutional. One of the justices in the opinion says, this is the end of this business of centralization, meaning central government power. I want you to go back and tell the president that we're not going to let this government centralize everything. We're not going to let the federal government tell every business what to do in their business. That's not their business to do so. This makes FDR incredibly angry because he's like, we have to fix the depression. I can't do these things, but you can't override the Supreme Court. You can't tell the Supreme Court no, like that's their decision. They've said that the government can't do these programs because they're unconstitutional. That's the whole point, going back to 1803 of Marbury versus Madison and this principle of judicial review. The judges have reviewed these programs and said they are unconstitutional. So rather than just say, oh man, that's too bad, FDR comes up with a different plan, and a plan that most certainly backfires. At the time, FDR refers to the Supreme Court as the 9 old men, because they're just 9 old, grumpy, angry, more conservative white men. So FDR comes up with a crazy plan. There's 9 of them on the Supreme Court. He says the president should be able to appoint a new justice, a new Supreme Court justice, to add to the Supreme Court for every justice who's over 70 years old. Now, 6 of the justices, 6 of the 9 are over 70 years old. And what that would do was take the Supreme Court from 9 people to 15 people, right? And then all those justices that FDR would be able to appoint would be more liberal, siding with him. And then he would be able to, in a sense, change the math of the Supreme Court so that they wouldn't be run by old school conservative people. Now, this gets incredible pushback. Because it appears on its surface in society like FDR is changing the rules to get his way. And that's kind of a fair assessment. Changing the rules to get his way. The Senate would have had to pass this law. The Senate says absolutely not, because we're not comfortable giving one person this kind of power just to circumvent or go around the Supreme Court. And then unfortunately, and the problem was at the time there's 4 conservative justices and 3 liberal justices. So those 2 swing votes in between to get to 9 decided every court case, yes or no. And by adding 6 justices, you get around that to ensure that you have a majority. Fortunately, the Senate says no, that's not okay. We're not going to approve that law. And then the Supreme Court, in 2 different cases, West Coast Hotel versus Parrish and Helvering versus Davis, does 2 really important things. They allow for the minimum wage law. They say having a minimum wage is constitutional. And then even more importantly, in Helvering v. Davis, they uphold the Social Security Act, really a foundational keystone program of the New Deal, as constitutional as well. So in a sense, FDR says, all right, fine, never mind. I guess we have a couple of good decisions, and the court does not get reformed. Over time, FDR is going to actually appoint 8 of the 9 justices, because he's going to serve 4 freaking terms, almost 4 terms. He got elected 4 times. And in that time, a bunch of other Supreme Court justices will retire or die, and he ends up filling the vast majority of the court by the end of his presidency. Anyway, both these cartoons kind of give the criticisms that I think are important and vital to understanding the court packing scheme, as it's called. Right here we have little drummer boy FDR drumming along with his legislative branch and insisting the judicial branch fall in and join them. And they're like pretty grumpy about it. And then this next one is even more critical, as we see a man with a cane, who's FDR, referencing his disability. We started by reorganizing the government, by giving the federal government more power. And then if we allow for Supreme Court revision, allow him to revise the structure of the Supreme Court to get his way, then in a sense, we've authorized a dictator. Of course, this cartoon gives us nice echoes or a reminder of that King Andrew I cartoon from first semester. And I think that's a cool place to kind of synthesize these questions over presidential power over time. All right. This cartoon is awesome as well. I enjoy this one very much. And here's FDR giving the test, the qualifying test for Supreme Court jobs. And all these people are saying, yes, FDR, absolutely. Right? Great. Now, once more all together, while the Constitution and the scales of justice are in the trash can. Now, by 1937, right, so FDR is elected in 32, he takes office in 33, has all these big programs. By 1937, Roosevelt faces some significant criticisms by people in both parties and say, all right, we've been doing this for 4 years. Right, the New Deal is too expensive. We still have high unemployment and the depression's not over. So why do we keep paying for these crazy programs when, in a sense, we're still in the Great Depression, right? His criticism is that the programs are big and costly and expensive, and we're still stuck in this depression that's not going anywhere, right? And sure enough, if we're going to look at this unemployment chart, unemployment skyrockets after the stock market crash. FDR is inaugurated president. Unemployment comes down. That's good. Unemployment comes down, but it doesn't come down nearly as much as it was before. So the question becomes like, what are we doing? These criticisms of the New Deal are important here because of what comes next. Now, this cartoon, it's a good cartoon, as FDR is, pumping as much money as possible into the New Deal, but all this money is leaking out, right? All the money's going away. It's not going where it should. And it's the workers, it's the taxpayer who are footing the bill for it. So beginning in 1937 into 1938, FDR says, all right, fine. So we cut the spending, specifically on the Works Progress Administration, this big federal works program, right? Backing off, spending less money on government-funded jobs programs, spending less money on putting people back to work, just to see if the economy can function on its own anymore. And immediately unemployment spikes back up. This is called the Roosevelt Recession of 1938. The Roosevelt Recession of 1938, because it's caused directly by these cuts in federal spending. And the way I like to explain this in class is this is like a bike with training wheels. Right? If you're riding a bike with training wheels, as the economy was with all this federal government spending for jobs, if you're riding a bike with training wheels and immediately the training wheels come off and you fall over, you can't ride a bike. In this case, the training wheels were taken off and then they fell off the bike. Unemployment went back up, which shows the economy's not fixed. Things aren't solved. By 1938, what actually ends up doing this to the employment, putting unemployment right back down where it was beforehand, has nothing to do with the New Deal. Not nothing. Has less to do with the New Deal and much more to do with employment due to World War II. So it's important to understand that as you think through this, that the New Deal does a great job of helping to ease the problems of the Great Depression, but it's actually World War II which ends the problems of the Great Depression. Right? This shows the fact that the minute we stop spending money on these jobs and unemployment goes right back up, this shows that the New Deal has not done enough, has not stimulated the economy enough to end the Great Depression without more federal government spending. So after 1937, as we see here, after 1937, New Deal reforms decline significantly. A couple reasons that are all really important. One, that court packing plan of adding justices, they make Congress quite irritable. The legislative branch is like, we didn't like that. We're not going to just keep rubber stamping, yes, all the things you want to do. Instead, we're going to be a little more assertive in our authority in telling you no. So court packing kind of kills FDR's credibility a little bit on this topic specifically. The Roosevelt recession of 37, 38 that we just talked about weakened confidence. It showed that the New Deal was not doing nearly as much as people claimed. Due to that, the midterm elections in 1938 saw significant Republican gains in the House and the Senate. So FDR's majority shrunk, and conservative Democrats are elected to office. More conservative, more old school style Democrats are also elected to office. And they're going to vote against New Deal legislation, even though they're in the same party as the president, because they're not sharing the same ideology as the president. So those are the reasons why New Deal reform is going to decline after 1937. Again, though, by 38, 39, and we'll talk about this next week, the US is increasingly focusing on what's happening in Europe and Asia, and increasingly trying to figure out, like, what are we really about to be in another world war? Is that really about to happen? We just finished the first one. So the US begins looking its attention outward instead of inward, and thus are not passing new significant New Deal reforms after 1937. And this is what it really looks like. Stock market crash, his inauguration, right? The Roosevelt recession puts unemployment back up, and then it's the war beginning that really kicks unemployment down to pre-Great Depression levels. Now, despite that, the impact is great. The impact is great. First, it becomes really the first time, with a small exception of the progressive era, but the first long-term time where the US government's going to invest in physical rehabilitation of the nation, right? In ensuring that we're not over farming, right? Agricultural Adjustment Act. Ensuring that we are harnessing natural resources, the Tennessee Valley Authority and the dams. Ensuring that we are conserving nature, the Civilian Conservation Corps, right? This idea of investing in protection of our physical state of our nation, and the forests and the farms and the trees, etc. That's a big deal. Next, human rehabilitation, right? The New Deal does a fantastic job of making sure that people on the surface don't turn to more desperate needs, like a socialist revolution, for example, like we see in the Soviet Union in the 19 teens. By putting people to work with, like, the Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, Social Security, which allows for old people, you invest in people and let them feel like they're doing their part. Third, political rehabilitation. In a sense, FDR saves the government by ensuring that at least people can look at the government and say they're trying to do what they can to help. And really, after from FDR on, people increasingly begin looking to the executive branch, to the presidency, as a place for answers when things go wrong. A significant long-term impact is a new political alignment. The Democratic Party, because of the New Deal, begins attracting Black voters, and this unification of working class, minority, and Black voters is going to hold the Democrats and Party for a long time. As we see public opinion, because of the Great Depression, New Deal, being more supportive of a more regulatory state, a more welfare state, a more hands-on government. Next significant impact is that democracy, in a sense, is saved in America. There's significant fears in the early 1930s that, like, we can't do this anymore, right? Like, this system is not working. But this shows that the system will be flexible to meet the changing needs of society as a whole. As the country changes, the system can change with it and still meet their needs. Second to last important impact, a way changed role of government. Right? We've never gone back to as small of a government as we had before the New Deal. We've never gone back that small again. This new role of the government, using the federal government's power, authority, and money to provide relief to individuals, to give people what they need, to regulate and reform the system. And this belief in liberalism and a limited welfare state is still dominant in the Democratic Party to this day. Finally, continuing a trend that we've seen all along is this continued urbanization, right? As jobs become scarcer and scarcer and scarcer, people are more increasingly heading to cities. And this is why by the 1940s, the US ratio of urban to rural dwellers is higher than it ever has been before. So those are the big impacts. You have a very short text to read, which I think provides nice contrast. It's going to be the experience of a Black worker during the Great Depression. So read that, respond to the questions, and answer my question. How much? Right now you've had the live session, the extension session. How much does the New Deal actually effectively and successfully respond to the problems of the Great Depression? Thanks, y'all. Have a great day. And as always, please send me a text or email whenever you need any help. Love y'all.